Shortly after releasing my first video, I realised that there was no way I could analyse the story of Merlin without first rewatching the entire thing. However, upon beginning my intense binge of the show, I slowly began to realise that perhaps it wasn't one actually meant for analysis, which, you know, was a great thing to become aware of after you've committed to a video series doing exactly that. What's important to acknowledge is that BBC's Merlin was made in a very different time. This was before streaming services, so episodes needed to be able to stand alone so that anyone could start watching and understand what was going on. When Merlin is seen for what it is, it's a really strong Monster of the Week show, but when seen through a contemporary lens, it doesn't necessarily hold up in certain areas. So at times, it was a challenge to analyse, but not impossible. Okay, now that's out of the way, I'm gonna jump right into things.
No young man, no matter how great, can know his destiny.
The job of the first episode of any show is to set up the premise and hook an audience. Merlin's first episode sets things up pretty clearly. We follow Merlin, who has been sent to Camelot by his mother to live under the care of Gaius, the court physician. Merlin has magic, but the use of it has been outlawed by the king, Uther Pendragon. Merlin's one job is to keep a low profile, but he struggles with this immensely, as he almost immediately picks a fight with the kingdom's bully, the prince Arthur. Merlin meets the great dragon, who explains that it's his destiny to protect Arthur, but Merlin's not here for it. And yet by the end of the episode, he saves Arthur's life and is made his servant as a reward. When we first meet Merlin, he has very little value for his own existence. He's a nobody. He puts too much value on his magic, claiming that if I can't use it, I may as well be dead. We see, however, that he's wrong. Magic isn't what makes him special. Audiences won't come back next week because of his magic. The CGI is way too shoddy for starters. No, the first episode ends with him saving Arthur's life. Though his magic assists, he physically runs towards the danger, proving his previous statement wrong. His magic isn't what makes him special, it's his natural instinct to do good. This leads us to the rest of the season, which is actually really solid. It's fun and campy, but it's the emotional beats that really give it strength. The scenes where the characters are allowed to slow down and just feel emotions, whether it's a father and son bonding or two friends messing with each other. These are the moments that make the show and kept people coming back. Merlin is a very active protagonist in the first season. It usually isn't him who sets the story into action, but he is eager to investigate and repeatedly sticks his neck out to help people, which is something we love about him at this point, but the dragon warns will be his downfall. Now, when rewatching season 1, it's odd to see that it's actually Merlin and Gaius' relationship that acts as the main focus, often paralleled with Uther and Arthur. Merlin is nothing if not a show about daddy issues. Like, seriously. Gaius is established as a paternal figure to Merlin from the first episode, though they're not immediately close. Merlin asks Gaius what he would do if his magic was discovered, and Gaius doesn't answer.
What would you do? Well, you just make sure it doesn't happen for both our sakes.
It's clear they're not at a point where Gaius would risk his life for Merlin, but by the end of the season, that's exactly what he does. He gives his life to save Merlin. Despite this heroic act in the finale, I was struck by one singular thought while watching Gaius throughout the first season. He is a coward. Almost every episode is the same, where Merlin wants to help someone, Gaius tells him it's a bad idea and better to turn a blind eye. Merlin does it anyway, actually helps the person, but then apologises to Gaius. Season 1 is so interesting because the truth is, Merlin has infiltrated the castle of the villains. Almost every single bad guy in Season 1 is entirely sympathetic, or you can at least understand their motivation. The episode, A Remedy to Cure All Ills, perfectly encapsulates this. A sorcerer named Edwin attempts to usurp Gaius' position as court physician in order to get close enough to assassinate Uther. Gaius eventually recognises Edwin and reveals that Uther murdered Edwin's parents in the Great Purge, and that he barely escaped execution himself, all with a smile on his face. At this point, let Edwin get his revenge. Even Nimue, the big bad villain of the season, is sympathetic. Of course her actions aren't entirely moral, but it's easy to understand where she's coming from. She's a believable villain, not looking for world domination but for vengeance. Uther wanted a child through any means, so he turned to magic, knowing full well that in order to create a life, one would need to be taken. He just didn't anticipate that life being his wife's. He then turned on magic and Nimue, blamed them both for his choices, and we as the audience are supposed to sympathise with him?
Whoa, dead wife?
The first season sets up a world of grey morality. The finale has Merlin take Nimue's life to bring back Gaius, even though she never once lied to him about the Cup of Life. Unfortunately, this grey morality and nuanced villains aren't seen again after this season. But back to Gaius for a moment. He's so loyal to Uther, and we're never given a reason why, other than he's the king. After a certain point, after losing the love of your life, after watching hundreds of people burnt at the stake, after a certain amount of child murders, you would think that he might begin to reassess his loyalty. It's difficult to understand the motivation for stopping the villains other than Arthur's not ready to be king yet. Speaking of which, the show does an excellent job at conveying the immense pressure Arthur is under. Not only is he trying to prove himself worthy of being crowned prince, but he has a reputation to maintain as the best knight in Camelot. Uther is relentless in his expectations to the point where Arthur has a hard time believing that his father even cares about him.
I always thought that... What? Was it... I was a big disappointment to you.
Well, that is my fault and not yours.
The episodes Excalibur and La Morte d'Arthur are standout in proving this wrong and in humanising Uther. Arthur's character building is done very well in the first season. I do think he needed more moments with Nimue, but other than that, he's just arrogant enough with people like Morgana and Merlin, but is still honourable and caring enough that he manages to be likeable and feel like a real person. Morgana's role in the first season is voice of reason. I don't know if the writers forgot at the time that they were going to reveal Morgana and Arthur as brother and sister, but they don't acknowledge it, so we're not going to either. The penultimate episode, To Kill the King, gives us the first taste of Morgana as an enemy of Uther's. Uther executes Gwen's father and locks Morgana up after she argues with him about it, so she decides to assassinate him, and this first attempt on his life conveys a lot more about Morgana than it initially appears. She's shown in previous episodes that she acts on morality and encourages Arthur to do the same, but there's also an impulsivity to her. After a heart-to-heart with Uther, she changes her mind once more and lets him live. I'll talk about this more in later seasons, as this trait becomes much more prevalent in her when she becomes the villain. Ironically, it's a trait she's inherited from Uther, who one moment will sentence a man to death and then the next will admit fault just to commit genocide a week later. The pacing of the first season is fairly slow, but really picks up with some great episodes, such as Excalibur. It's a really strong episode that shows Arthur at his best. A wraith known as the Black Knight challenges Arthur to a fight to the death. Arthur desperately wants to accept, but the other knights keep stepping in to protect him. This infuriates him, not just because he wants to prove himself, but because he doesn't want anyone dying for him. After being unable to accept the challenge twice, he initiates his own challenge, which is just the ultimate power move. It's a fantastic episode in terms of tension building, and as I mentioned before, fits in thematically, drawing focus to Uther and Arthur's relationship. The episode also sets up the impending threat of Kilgara's release, and gives a peek into the anger he has. I have more to say on Kilgara in the Season 2 section. For now, I want to briefly mention Lancelot. He's a relatively simple character. He's honourable and desperately wishes to become a Knight of Camelot. His eponymous first episode establishes his bond with Merlin, as he is one of the few people who know about his magic, and is entirely accepting of it. It was important to lay the groundwork for this early on, as anyone who knew the legends beforehand would have known he becomes very important later on. Lancelot's actual personality is part of a bigger issue, and is something I'll discuss much later in the section I call The Knight Problem. It's time to properly discuss the final episode of the season, La Morte d'Arthur. It's a great finale with actual stakes. Arthur is poisoned by the questing beast, and Merlin has no way of curing him. Uther is distraught. Anthony Head was the perfect casting choice for Uther. He manages to make him so unlikable most of the time, but when necessary can break your heart and make you feel genuine sorrow. Merlin decides to go to the Isle of the Blessed. Nimue gives him water from the Cup of Life, and at no point claims that it will be Merlin's life taken. She's never outright says it, but she's just ominous enough that he really should have gathered. Arthur is revived, but it's Merlin's mother who is now dying. Merlin plans to go back, but Gaius goes before he can and sacrifices himself. Merlin and Nimue have one of the worst fights I have ever seen, and Gaius is brought back after Merlin kills Nimue. This is a great episode because the theme of father and son is brought to a head, and because there's genuine tension. While we know Merlin isn't going to die, we know someone has to in order to save Arthur. The rules established with the Cup of Life are actually kept to as well. Gaius is only revived after Nimue is dead and balance is restored. Furthermore, when Merlin thinks he's going to die, he goes to say goodbye to Arthur, and it's a perfect display of where their friendship is at. There's some teasing, how do you say this word? There's some teasing, a little standoffish. There's some teasing, a little standoffish. There's some teasing and a little standoffish. Oh my god. Hello? How do you say this word? There's some teasing and a little standoffishness and a genuinity. It's a perfect summary of how much their friendship has grown and how much more it has left to go. Their relationship in the first season is interestingly paced. Despite Arthur's treatment at times, they become fast friends. The rapport between them is lots of fun, but their friendship moves a lot faster than I initially realised. They're willing to die for each other by the 4th episode. There's also this building pressure of Merlin wanting to tell Arthur the truth, but there's no reason to yet. If anything, he should have told Gwen. I think she would have initially been scared, but would have kept the secret. The thing is, everyone loves Merlin and Arthur's relationship, so not having a slow build isn't really a problem until we get to season 2. With most TV shows, the second season is usually the best. The writers, actors and director are still figuring things out in the first season. It's mainly world building and setups, so season 2 is the time to step it up. Merlin's best season, however, isn't until season 4, so what's wrong with this? Well, the term Flanderization perfectly summarises the issue. The official definition is the process through which a fictional character's essential traits are simplified over the course of a serial work. Usually this takes time to happen, but Merlin somehow does this in the second season. An example of this, Arthur's treatment of Merlin somehow gets worse. Merlin is literally letting Arthur step on him. How did this happen? They've undone all the development from the last season. It becomes a very one-sided friendship. Arthur is just genuinely mean, and because Merlin's just taking it, he comes off more as a bully than he did the last season. I mean, look at this scene.
Merlin. Sorry? Not the right answer. What?
Generally, the characters seem to be doing impressions of themselves. In the episode Lancelot and Guinevere, Merlin isn't bothered at all that Gwen is kidnapped. The characters' care for each other is so inconsistent, and when they don't care, the audience knows that there's no real stakes and have no reason to care themselves. Because of this, the season starts out much weaker than the last. Merlin is also a very passive character this time. He's a side character to everyone else's stories, whereas in the first season he had a lot more agency and actively made the decision to help, rather than people just dragging him along.
I'll just sit here then.
He's also a lot more teenagery and angsty this season. There's a melancholy hanging over him throughout as he grows restless of having to hide who he really is. Season 2 also sets the trend of Merlin never being allowed to be happy, and based on how much the show seemed to like kicking him, we should have guessed the ending. It isn't until the 7th episode, The Witchfinder, that the quality of the show picks up again, and the characters begin to behave more like themselves. This is because there's an emotional core to the episode, not just magical mischief. This is proven further by the episode right after Sins of a Father, where Arthur is told the truth of how his mother died, that he's born of magic, and we get this incredible scene between Uther and Arthur. It's such a powerful moment where we see Uther finally get confronted for his actions. It's also frustrating because Merlin is forced again to choose between what would be easier for him and what's best for Arthur. though I don't know that keeping the truth from him was the best solution. However, this season is mainly made of faults. Gwen and Arthur are thrown together really quickly. They interact twice in the first season, then kiss in the second episode of this one. After that, they're kept apart by their status, but again, a slow build into them actually being in love would have been a lot more compelling, since I don't know many people who are that invested in their relationship. The writers thankfully dropped the Morgana and Arthur romance, but it is interesting to watch as Gwen replaces Morgana in the narrative's function as Arthur's love interest and moral compass. Morgana and Arthur's friendship is forced to take a backseat, as is Merlin and Gwen's. It enforces this idea of Arthur not only needing a wife, but a mother as well, and that's what Gwen provides. Morgana doesn't have time to babysit Arthur anyway, as her powers start showing themselves more obviously and the gaslighting from Gaius increases. In this season, we see more of her rashness. In the third episode, she leaves Camelot to join the Druids and doesn't consider the consequences at all. For some reason, she thinks she can just leave Camelot without saying a word to anyone, and Uther won't instantly assume she's been kidnapped. She's not a villain at this point, but she's very easily manipulated and used. They introduce Alvar in episode 11, the closest thing Morgana has to a love interest, and we never see him again after this episode, a habit that the show falls into. Because of her impulsiveness and selfishness at times, it's very consistent with her character to be in way over her head, so Morgause is able to use her very easily. Morgause is a character with so much unutilized potential. She starts off seeming like she's going to be a really complicated villain, but we never get to learn very much about her, which is just a shame after such a great introduction. I want to quickly mention Gwen and Morgana's relationship. They have very sweet moments together, but not nearly enough attention. We only ever see a very surface level friendship, and this causes problems later. The season does set up Odin, which is a nice thread that eventually gets paid off, and there are some great moments. A special shout out to the Beauty and the Beast two-parter. I don't know whose idea it was, but they made choices, and this is still one of the best moments from the show.
This isn't funny.
Oh, it is. It is. The thought of Uther marrying a troll. Was it a very public affair?
Public enough?
This episode set a precedent for their goofier episodes and began to tip the scales towards their more slapstick, pantomime-esque comedy, rather than just the comedy being in the dialogue, which isn't necessarily bad, it just led to tonal issues later. Season 2 also features the episode with Merlin's one and only love interest. Episode 9, Lady of the Lake, introduces Freya. Like Arthur and Gwen, the romance is quick, but believable when you consider that they're in their early 20s and bond over their shared trauma of having to hide who they really are. However, I can't help but think that part of the motivation between the romance between Freya and Merlin was so that they could go, see, Merlin's not gay, he was with a woman that one time. The penultimate episode of this season, The Fires of Idiaschulus, has Merlin backed into a corner, as Morgana has been unwittingly used by Morgause for a spell, and the only way to break it is to kill her. In my last video, I blamed Merlin for not attempting to reason with Morgana, and while I still think that definitely could have been an option, it's genuinely heartbreaking watching his internal conflict as he is forced to take on this for the greater good attitude. I also think it's such a quietly intense moment and one of the most memorable ones from the show. I personally love when the climax of an episode lies in emotion and not action. In the end though, he isn't able to go through with it. He causes the damage, but his good heart is his downfall, as he gives Morgause the poison so she can create an antidote and save Morgana. Now, the only reason Merlin knew how to stop Morgause was because, as usual, he went to Kilgara, but this time he's forced to keep his promise of releasing him. Throughout this season, there's an impending sense of doom as Merlin knows he is running out of time and will eventually have to set the dragon free. The finale shows the direct consequences of this action. Kilgara's motivations are very confusing because once he is released, he attacks the kingdom as revenge for his capture. But does that mean he never actually believed in Albion and Merlin's destiny? It was just like a means to an end. Or perhaps he still wanted it but first wanted to get revenge on Camelot. The dragon is yet another character that needed much more attention. Merlin becoming a Dragon Lord was also a nice concept. It's a shame though that they introduced his father just to kill him off. We get to hear Merlin speaking the dragon language for the first time, and honestly, I don't think anyone but Colin Morgan could have pulled that off because he fully commits to it.
Dragon! Nandidikai! Kai miss Epsipas! Imala! Krat! Gatosta hopo! Caris!
Overall, this is a pretty shoddy season, yet it still has some of the most iconic moments, so... Jumping into Season 3. Because the season starts an overarching plot, it's easier to talk about the story as a whole, though most of the episodes are still meant as standalones. Let's talk about the first episode because it sets up a lot for the rest of the season. The two-parter, The Tears of Uther Pendragon, goes in hard. We start with the boys, and they're bantering as usual, the insults having more of a back and forth this season. Arthur is still unnecessarily harsh at times, but overall it feels much more equal.
Describe dollop head.
In 2 words?
Yeah.
Prince Arthur.
Morgana returns, and she's just outright evil. And the show really wants us to know that she's evil, so she does an evil smirk about 17 times just to make sure we don't forget. There's a theory that Morgause used the Mandrake root on her, like Morgana later does with Gwen in Season 5, to turn her against Arthur, and it's a pretty sound theory since a lot can obviously change in a year, but it's not like Morgana enjoyed inflicting pain before, she was just a bit angsty. It would explain why she suddenly hates everyone. Merlin and Uther, I understand, but why Arthur and Gwen? She had such a big influence over Arthur, she could have definitely started to persuade him or at least tried to manipulate him into looking at magic differently. Anyway, the first episode, Morgana takes Uther's tears to Morgause, who then uses a mandrake root to make Uther see hallucinations. It's great because you genuinely feel bad for Uther, but then you're told that he's seeing a little dead boy because he had children drowned in the Great Purge, and then you're just kind of like, okay. Morgause uses the kingdom's current weakness to strike with Senrid's army. Senrid is yet another character introduced who seems interesting, but that we learn nothing about other than he likes making euphemisms with Morgause.
You're a woman of great courage, Morgause, but I don't think with my sword. I do this only to please you.
Is that so? Then please me.
Make no claim upon the throne. Only the spoils of victory.
You will get what you deserve, Senrid. I can assure you of that.
We get it. They're sleeping together. Can we move on? Senrid's army attacks Camelot, and Arthur is forced to step up as king for the first time. He's led battles before, but now he has to make tactical choices without his father's guidance. He chooses to put the castle under siege, which would have worked, except Morgana raises an army of the dead from the crypts. This leads to Morgana and Merlin's only real conversation. In it, Merlin can see that Morgana is a lost cause. The episode ends with Merlin stopping the army of the dead, and Arthur pushing back Senrid's army. These episodes are a decent start to the season, but from here on, the tonal issues get ridiculous. Right after these episodes of dead children hallucinations, we get The Goblin's Gold. This is where we start to get more of that slapstick pantomime comedy. Rather than having episodes that are tonally balanced, we get a silly episode, then a serious one, then another silly episode. This is fine for someone casually dipping in on episodes, but it means that when watching them consecutively, they feel extremely jarring. This is also the season that Gawain is introduced. Far more interesting than Lancelot, he's yet another character deep in daddy issues. Gawain's a hothead, but he also has a strong sense of justice and enjoys being in the action. He, like Merlin, is quick to form attachments, but as he says, people usually get sick of him, so he's learnt to put up walls to avoid getting hurt. That's why his friendship with Merlin is so sweet. They bond over the daddy issues, and Gawain quickly becomes protective of his new bestie. Season 3 is the best season for Gawain. The show takes time to build his friendship with Arthur and Merlin and sets up the significance of their trio: magic, courage, and strength. Unfortunately, the next 2 seasons fail to continue with this, but that's a topic for their night problem. This season also begins to properly delve into the idea of prophecy for the first time. Before now, Kilgara and others have spoken about destiny, but with this episode, The Crystal Cave, the show begins taking steps with its world building. Merlin is taken to the cave by Taliesin, a sorcerer who I guess had nothing better to do with his time than just mess with Merlin. The episode explores the idea of how trying to fight destiny is often what leads you to it. Merlin finds it difficult to ignore what he'd seen, Morgana assassinating Uther. He makes small decisions that makes what he saw in the cave closer to coming true. Until finally he accidentally almost kills Morgana. He causes her severe head trauma, and the rest of the episode is actually extremely emotional as Merlin is forced to watch everyone mourn, even though he knows that it's probably for the best. The dragon outright told Merlin his hamartia in the second episode.
Your determination to see goodness in people will be your undoing.
But that can't change who Merlin is. He can't continue to watch everyone suffer. Uther actually begs Gaius to kill Morgana through any means possible with a wink wink get magic up in here, something that Merlin points out is so infuriating in the later episode. And it's here that we learn that Uther is Morgana's real father. They just enjoy making him less and less likeable with every episode. Merlin heals Morgana, but she remembers the conversation and is furious to learn the truth. She decides to kill Uther, though Morgause advises her to think things through. This sets up an interesting dynamic as it's clear that Morgause is the brains and the schemer, whereas Morgana is far more ready to take action. This is one of the few consistencies with her character and makes it easy to understand why it takes Morgana so long to succeed in her plans. This is a great episode overall, but Merlin doesn't really learn from it. Gaius repeatedly tells him throughout the show that there are multiple realities and nothing is set in stone. It's better to ignore prophecy most of the time. When it comes to this stuff, it's one of the few times Merlin should be listening to Gaius. It isn't until the Eye of the Phoenix episode that Morgana outright tries to kill Arthur. Up until this point, she's generally stayed away from him where she can, but then after learning that she's also Uther's child, her and Morgause switch tactics, realising that if they kill Arthur, Camelot won't have its crowned prince and Morgana will have a legitimate claim to the throne. Still, it's strange that the show doesn't bother to create nuance with their relationship. This season gives us some nice friendship moments with Merlin and Gwen.
Thinking about you.
And some interesting background on Gaius in the episode Love in a Time of Dragons. I had never properly seen this episode before because at the age I was watching the show, I didn't really want to see an episode about old people and love. It's a sweet episode though, where once again we see Merlin just love in love.
What's her name?
Alice.
We discover that Gaius was once engaged to a sorceress named Alice, but in the Great Purge he helped her escape. This raises the question once more, however, why is Gaius so loyal to Uther? Why not go with Alice? What kept him in Camelot serving under a tyrant? Also, what in the hell is this abomination? Whoever designed the Manticore took some serious creative liberties. It's almost beautiful in its horridness. Anyway, this is also the season where Dragoon is introduced, a character that just became bigger and bigger with every appearance. I think the character works sometimes. It's nice hearing Merlin just speak his thoughts to Uther without fear.
I stupid, arrogant, old tyrant! Hold your tongue.
And you, oh, I have heard how you mistreat your servants. They do everything for you, but do they ever get any thanks? No. You're a spoilt, arrogant brat with the brains of a donkey and the face of a toad.
But then he goes a little too far, so it's a bit of a balancing act at times. It's also fun to get this image of the Merlin we know from the legend, and watch as we see Dragoons slowly turn into his Emrys persona. Both Arthur and Merlin exhibit the most growth in episode 11, The Sorcerer's Shadow. Arthur lets Uther win in the tournament, conveying how much he's changed from the boy we met in episode 1, and Merlin helps Gilly, a boy who's very reflective of Merlin's episode 1 mindset. Unfortunately, Gilly, like so many characters, never appears again. This is another episode that I used to skip when I was younger. It felt like pointless filler before the finale, but it works to update the audience on where both the boys are at this point and how much they've grown. Now, the two-parter finale. The finale is basically the two-part opener done better. Senrid successfully overthrows Camelot with the help of an immortal army. Season 3 has great moments, but does come off lazy at times. The Cup of Life is reintroduced, though its rules are not. Morgana seemingly cares about Gwen out of nowhere, but is then ready to execute her at the drop of a hat. And while Morgana's big reveal is an iconic moment of the show, and I love how they did it, it occurred to me while watching that we never actually see the characters discover she's a sorcerer. They know she's working with more ghosts, but they don't know why, and it's never explained. The good news is they pay off Freya as she returns as the Lady of the Lake to help Merlin, and Lancelot is finally knighted. The Round Table and this whole scene is just perfection, though Percival is just kind of thrown in there. They sneak into the castle and Merlin knocks over the Cup of Life, which destroys the entire army. Morgause is fatally injured and Morgana's escape is also iconic. Now, really quickly before I get into season 4, I just want to interject that while these are my opinions, I'm doing my best to keep my own personal biases out of this analysis. Anyway, now onto season 4, or as I like to call it, the best season. The show continues to follow the Monster of the Week structure, but it just shows how good this can be, as we're given just solid episodes one after another. The season picks up a year later from season 3, and we can see there's a rhythm to the lives of these characters. Camelot feels like a more vibrant world, not to mention that Arthur being a bully problem is completely eradicated. Arthur is so affectionate towards Merlin from this season onwards. You can see he's genuinely entertained and endeared by him, which is a welcome contrast to the first 3 seasons. When he is harsh with him, it's either part of their back and forth, a one-off joke, or Merlin just genuinely deserves it. He nags non-stop during these last 2 seasons, so I can't entirely blame Arthur anymore. In the first episode, we see that a year later, Uther remains broken from Morgana's betrayal. His depression is entirely believable after how much setup the show did in the previous seasons. We're also very suddenly introduced to Agravain. Agravain is Arthur's uncle, and he's only here so Arthur can be betrayed again. They could have given him nuance, but nope. I understand hating Uther for the death of his sister, but again, why Arthur? He's very much just a villain for the sake of it. There's honestly nothing else to his character other than he might be in love with Morgana. I don't know what the writers were going for, but it did not hit. I think everyone was made uncomfortable by this. Meanwhile, Morgana is alone. She sacrifices a dying Morgause, and at this point, I feel like she should be asking herself if it's even worth it. Morgana and Arthur feel very paralleled in this season in terms of their personal arcs. This is Arthur's season to prove himself once and for all. After Uther's death in episode 3, The Wicked Day, he officially becomes king, and we see him seriously questioning for the first time whether he's worthy. He has a huge legacy to live up to. He begins to isolate himself, and like Morgana, there's a sense of growing loneliness. Except Arthur has friends that can pull him out of this and that will look out for him. Morgana has essentially no one. Both her and Arthur begin to seek allies, but while Arthur is successful in attaining them, Morgana is rejected throughout the season. This is why I wish they'd taken the episode of Servant of Two Masters a little more seriously. The episode starts with such drama. Merlin is a constant in Arthur's life. Bradley James does such an incredible job of conveying the disbelief, fear and shock that Arthur feels when he sees Merlin on the floor. Morgana then captures Merlin, and their every scene together is just perfect. Morgana's line,
You're wrong. Don't think I don't understand loyalty just because I've got no one left to be loyal to.
Is gorgeous and is just a glimpse of the episode we could have gotten, where maybe Merlin reports back to her and she actually becomes attached to his company. This is still a brilliant episode, with some of the funniest moments from the show. I just also think they could have used it as a chance to humanise Morgana. That being said, the show does a perfect job of balancing tone this season. Rather than fun episodes followed by dramatic ones, the comedy and drama are interlaced with each other. Like The Wicked Day, for example. Dragoon returns and the jokes just hit right.
I broke a pot.
I mean, come all this way to kill me, why have you come here? I take it you didn't come all this way just to smash my favourite pot.
While not being too out there that the tragedy of the episode is lost, Arthur and Uther are heartbreaking in the few episodes they're given. It's also really difficult to hate Uther at this point. He's just so pitiful. This season overall has a much more grown-up feel to it. I mean, they even signalled this in the opening credits.
The destiny of a great kingdom rests on the shoulders of a young man.
And I am not a boy. I am a man. See?
Merlin becomes more impressive. There's a sense of authority to him, which we get to see in the 4th episode, Athusa.
I am the last Dragon Lord, and I am warning you. Leave this egg alone.
Speaking of which, we get a baby dragon. Thusa is born and conveys the optimism of the characters at this point and symbolises the hope that Season 4 has for the future. On a darker note, they kill off Lancelot in the 2nd episode, only to bring him back in episode 9, Lancelot du Lac. This is a difficult episode to watch. Morgana brings Lancelot back with necromancy, but he has no memory of his past and is owned by her. She sends him to Camelot to seduce Gwen. He gives her an enchanted necklace that makes it impossible for her to stay away. There are genuine emotional stakes in this episode. It's also so cruel to bring Lancelot back just to ruin his legacy, since Arthur never finds out that it's not really him. The scene between Arthur and Gwen is incredible. The show shines brightest when it puts its characters in scenes with genuine emotion.
If you had doubts,
I didn't have any doubt.
Then forgive me, because I must be really stupid. What were you doing?
sorry.
I was drawn to him. I couldn't stop myself. I don't know why. I love you. You mean everything to me.
On the subject of Gwen, there's nothing wrong with her fulfilling the role of dutiful future wife, but the only other main female is Morgana, and it sends a troubling message when the only female character with agency is the bad guy. Not that the show hasn't had great female characters, but they're never a part of the main cast, and if they are, they're the villain. This season is really meant for testing Arthur. In episode 10, A Herald of a New Age, we get an insight into Arthur's past and learn that he led attacks on druid camps. It makes sense that Arthur would have done this under Uther's rule, but at this point, we as the audience feel like we know everything about these characters. To suddenly be told this feels like a betrayal of trust. It shows, however, that Albion is not an impossible goal, as Arthur decrees that the druids will live freely from now on. Okay, I'm finally ready to talk about the night problem. In the episode Herald of a New Age, Elian goes through an ordeal. He's haunted, then possessed by the spirit of a druid boy, but we don't get the chance to see the impact of this experience on his character. A lot of what we love about the Knights are based on small interactions, like them treating Merlin like a younger brother. Their frat boy ways, each one of them is lovable, but there's no depth. The story doesn't bother spending any time with them. Even Gawain is eventually forgotten and becomes a one-note joke. The actors brought a lot to the characters. I just wish we could have seen more from them, because I know I love each one of them, but that's based on my own projections and on the fan culture that does more to flesh them out in a short Tumblr post and fanfics. Now, onto the two-part finale. Morgana finds yet another random warlord to help her take over Camelot. Agravain's true intentions are finally revealed, but Arthur never actually faces him. Instead, Merlin is the one to stop him. And it's in this moment we get the first real glimpse of how callous Merlin can be. As I've said, the whole season for Arthur is about proving himself. Since losing the throne to Morgana, he's especially unsure, and Tristan's criticisms certainly aren't helping. This is all culminating in the moment where he pulls the sword from the stone. With the help of Merlin's magic, he pulls the sword from the rock, and his arc of the season is complete. He goes to face Morgana, and this is the first time that they've come face to face since her betrayal. Speaking of Morgana, we never actually get to see her rule at any point. We know from season 3 she behaves like a tyrant, she has no problem with killing her citizens. It makes her extremely hypocritical to talk about wishing to not have to live in fear. Anyway, so how do they fight against Morgana? She's so powerful, and Merlin can only do his magic in secret, so that's got to mean a really difficult fight, right?
Actually, it's gonna be super easy. Barely an inconvenience. Oh, really? Yes.
Merlin places a straw thingy under Morgana's bed that means she temporarily can't use her powers. But when did Merlin even learn this kind of magic? It's a very Ex Machina finale, but it ends on a high note with Gwen taking a place on the throne, so it's difficult to stay mad at it. Overall, it's a solid season that really hits its emotional beats. Okay, Jesus Christ, we're almost there. Season 5. The story picks up 3 years later after the previous events, and it is jarring. We discover that Morgana spent 2 of those years in a cell, locked away with Athena. We also quickly discover that Athena has no real purpose of the narrative other than symbolism, as the creature that once meant hope for the future has now been crippled and weakened, and we all really should have realised what this meant for the finale. Meanwhile, Gwen is a girl boss queen and has had a complete personality makeover. The moments where we get to see her ruling are genuinely cool, but it's only in the first 2 episodes and then in the finale where this happens. We're told that Camelot has been prospering, but that a few knights haven't returned from the most recent mission. 2-parter opener is fine. The thing that carries it are the classic Merlin and Arthur moments. The 2-parter has some of my favourite exchanges between them.
You know, if Morgana doesn't kill you, I will.
Threatening a king is treason, Merlin.
What about threatening an ass?
Heard that.
But the actual story is pretty weak. This idea of Arthur's Bane is introduced, and it's finally revealed that it's himself, and he will lead to his own downfall, which I think is only like half true. This season is also where Merlin's loyalty really begins to culminate in an extremely unhealthy way. He's so determined to keep Arthur safe that he's willing to let Gawain and Percival die. This highlights the general problem where people pick and choose when to care for characters. For example, in the episode A Lesson in Vengeance, Gwen pins Arthur's assassination attempt on Merlin, and the knights just go with it. We don't see any of them defend Merlin when we know at the very least Gawain would never accept this. I mean, in a previous episode, Merlin was able to say,
What is the job exactly?
To kill Arthur?
Driving you mad, is it?
Not for much longer.
But I digress. This season shows Merlin under the most pressure he's ever been. He begins to isolate himself to the point that Arthur knows there's something bothering him and is reaching out to him the way Merlin was in the previous season.
I haven't seen you smile these past 3 days.
I'm not sure there's a great deal to smile about.
Except Merlin can't open up. From the first season, people have been telling him that only he can keep Arthur safe. The burden of this destiny has only become heavier because the truth is, it's not just about keeping Arthur safe. It's about the future that he will bring. So many people are relying on Merlin to help bring that future about. So many have given their lives that it's no wonder Merlin doesn't behave like himself this season. Episode 5, The Desire, is a perfect example of Merlin's change, and is actually a really great episode in terms of character study. First, however, we need to talk about Mordred. Though I haven't mentioned him, Mordred appears sporadically throughout the previous seasons, his motives constantly unclear. He is then introduced in the first episode of the season, Arthur's Bane. Merlin sees a prophecy in which Mordred kills Arthur, so from the start he's obviously very suspicious of this boy who claims he wants nothing more than to serve Arthur. However, as time goes along, Mordred proves himself to be extremely loyal to Arthur, and Merlin's suspicions are based on nothing but a prophecy of one of many futures, and knowing the future has never exactly benefited Merlin. Now, episode 5, The Desire. The pacing is pretty slow in this episode, with most of the season to be honest. Mordred gets to go on his first official mission and we get some fun frat boy night scenes. Merlin admits that Mordred is thoughtful and modest, but he's very inconsistent with these feelings. For once, Merlin should be listening to Gaius. The episode goes on to add some more late world building, introducing the triple goddess who is given judgment against Arthur. Arthur and the knights go to confront them, but Mordred is injured in the process. Arthur is distraught as Gaius has no way of healing him, and he will surely die. Knights see each other as brothers, but Arthur has taken a much more fatherly role with Mordred. He cares for him deeply and can't bear to let him die. He and Merlin return to the Desire to beg for their help. This is when they present a choice.
If you wish to save all you hold dear, if you wish to save your kingdom, embrace the old religion, learn her ways, bow to the goddess.
This puts Merlin in one of the trickiest decisions of his life. Let Mordred die and have magic banned, or magic returns and Mordred lives to kill Arthur. Earlier in the episode, Merlin has this exchange with Gaius.
What happened to the young boy who came into my chambers just a few years ago? He grew up. And he learned the meaning of duty.
So many people are counting on Merlin to succeed. He's learned from his past mistakes. His kindness is his weakness. However, callousness isn't the answer either. This is another great episode for Arthur and Merlin moments. It shows especially how Merlin is no longer just a servant, he's Arthur's most trusted advisor. Arthur asks him for his opinion and it's up to Merlin to tip the balance on Arthur's decision. In the end, he chooses to kill Mordred, but when they return to Camelot, Mordred is healed and the truth becomes clear.
You did what you thought was best.
I assumed the best way to protect Arthur was to kill Mordred.
A perfectly natural assumption.
But all I did was make sure he lived. That was the Seer's judgment. Mordred's life is Arthur's punishment for rejecting magic.
Like I said, the pacing is fairly slow with this episode, but it's fantastic in what it does for the characters. Also, real quick, did Arthur just forget that Mordred was a druid? It never comes up and they act like it's a secret. It's just infuriating that it's not addressed. Next, episode 6, The Dark Tower. The writers knew they were going to be killing Ellian off, so they decided to start the episode with a small Gwen and Ellian interaction. I'd like to point out that this is roughly only the third time that they actually talk in the entire show. Gwen is kidnapped by Morgana, who wants to use her to draw Arthur into a trap. Morgana locks Gwen up in a tower filled with mandrake roots. Gwen manages to fight off the mandrake root's influence and shows that strength exists in different ways, and Gwen's unbreakable will is hers. Meanwhile, Merlin and the gang eventually make their way to the tower, and the show goes on to kill the one and only Black Knight. And it's not even for a good reason. It's just pure shock value, because at this point, Morgana has managed to brainwash Gwen with her magic, and Gwen isn't even herself anymore. For the next 3 episodes, Gwen is trying to kill Arthur so that she can be the sole ruler. I personally find all the evil Gwen episodes pointless, but episode 8, The Hollow Queen, is good for more Merlin development. Gwen conspires with the man who held Morgana captive for 2 years, the Sarum, to assassinate Arthur. Meanwhile, Merlin is taken from the kingdom by a druid called Daigle, who wants his help curing his sister. The show really likes its lonely, skinny white boys. Speaking of which, we're given another example of how much Merlin has grown up.
I don't matter.
I never think that. We all matter. Have a drink.
We eventually discover that Daigle's not really a druid and Morgana paid him to get Merlin away from Camelot. It's good to see Morgana acknowledge that Merlin is trouble and ruins her plans. It's just nice for her to use normal logic for once, but it stops there after she gives him a slow and painful poison. Daigle returns to help Merlin, who is unable to move or even use his magic to heal himself. He's forced to rely on Daigle to follow his instructions. It's really great seeing Merlin use his medical skills to heal himself. The episode ends with Daigle giving his life to save Arthur's, yet another person that Merlin needs to succeed for. Thankfully, we reach episode 9 with all my heart, and Arthur is told the truth about Gwen. This episode showcases how Arthur really isn't good at deception. He only has to pretend that everything's normal with Gwen for a short while, and it takes so much strain from him. He wears his heart on his sleeve, and it physically pains him to watch Gwen lie to his face and not be able to confront her. Curing Gwen is another case of
He's super easy, barely an inconvenience. Oh, really?
And that's the end of the evil Gwen plot. Before I move on, however, there's one final thing I want to address about this episode. In order to perform magic in front of Arthur, Merlin disguises himself as an old woman. So, is there a spell that can turn you into a woman and then he used the aging spell, or is there a spell that specifically turned him into an old woman? It's not just an aging spell because Merlin looks entirely different from Dragoon. So, what? what is with the show and having the most ridiculously specific spells for some things, and then not having spells for the most basic stab wounds? Okay, sure. Episode 10, The Kindness of Strangers, is an interesting episode. I barely remembered it because it comes off as filler, but there's actually some really hard-hitting moments. Alator is brought back just so the show can kill him off. Finna, a friend of his, seeks out Merlin to give him a prophecy, but they're tracked down by Morgana, who is obsessed with discovering the identity of Emrys. Though only briefly introduced, Finna's devotion to Merlin and Albion make her extremely endearing. Finna and Merlin are cornered, so she offers to stay behind so Merlin can hide. She knows that if Morgana tortures her for Merlin's true identity, that she won't be able to resist, and so she takes her own life. Having this episode so close to the finale acts as a final reminder of the sacrifices that have been made for the future of Albion. The episode ends with Morgana officially declaring war, which leads me to the final episode I'll be discussing in this video, The Drawing of the Dark. This is the episode where Mordred finally turns to the dark side. It's an extremely frustrating episode for many reasons, but the main one is that Mordred was intensely bonded with Morgana and still turned her down on multiple occasions. Yet when his childhood love, Kara, is introduced, he continues to be loyal to her. He's shown multiple times that she's not the girl he once knew, but still believes that she can be good. He's blinded by his love for her, which is believable, but his entire character transforms the way Morgana's did. Also, if he could escape the prison the whole time, then why didn't he do it, I don't know, say before the execution?
Because everyone escapes from the dungeon. Have you ever noticed how everyone, like, our dungeon's the worst dungeon ever?
Anyway, the episode ends with Morgana finally discovering the true identity of Emrys. A moment that, while extremely foreboding, felt so good after the wait. This season really is a mixed bag. There are some truly fantastic moments, like the Uther and Merlin payoff.
You have magic. I was born with it.
And some cute moments. And some interesting moments.
It's hardly any wonder your prisoners are being murdered if you can't even remember who you let in and who you let out. You let me in! And I thank you for that. And now, apparently, I have to let myself out. Ah! Goodbye!
Despite my criticisms, I want to reiterate that I love the show. Again, I'm holding it up to the standard of a very different time for TV. It did have some truly epic moments though, consistently taking things from the legends and adapting them in creative ways. Every prophecy throughout the show is based on the legends, and it created a fun ramping of excitement as the audience waited for those moments to be portrayed on screen. The show fulfills all the promises it makes. Morgana will be evil, Gwen will be queen, Mordred will kill Arthur, Arthur and Merlin will unite the lands of Albion and bring back magic,